Luck has a way of showing up for some people.
That's what Latrice said, standing inside his building, in his office. Wearing a dry, cleaned suit, she'd rehearsed her lines in front of a borrowed mirror. She had memorized her talking points. She had reminded herself that morning, Latrice Beaumont is still someone to be reckoned with. She had no idea who she was about to face. The receptionist's voice was calm.
Miss Beaumont? Mr. Montgomery will see you now.
Third floor, end of the hall. Double doors, dark wood, no nameplate. The chair behind the desk was turned away, facing the Houston skyline, floor-to-ceiling glass, an entire city laid out like a blueprint. She straightened her jacket.
Good morning. I'm Latrice Beaumont. I have a 10 o'clock.
The chair turned.
Hello, Latrice.
She didn't move. Couldn't move. Her portfolio hit the floor. Resume, references, talking points, scattering like a deck of cards across polished concrete.
Zaya, this company is yours? How is that even possible?
He looked at her across the desk. Not wounded, not angry. Just completely, terribly clear.
Have a seat,
he said. She sat before her composure could negotiate the terms, but to understand why that moment hit her like a verdict. Let me take you back to the fall of 2013, when a 26-year-old Zaire Montgomery first met Latrice Beaumont at a community fundraiser on Emancipation Avenue in Houston. She was radiant, sharp-tongued and fiercely ambitious in a way he genuinely admired. She had grown up with very little, same as him, and she wore her hunger for more like a second skin. He fell in love with that. They married in 2014 at Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church, with Mama Dolores crying through the whole ceremony and Zaire's best friend, Malik Caldwell, standing as best man in a suit that was one size too large. For 8 years, Zaire worked, long shifts in the Houston heat. He came home, showered, and went to his corner of the kitchen table to study. Construction engineering, software systems, structural design. He had a mind like a blueprint, precise, methodical, nothing wasted. He was always building towards something. He just hadn't yet put a name to it. Latrice was building too. Her PR firm grew. Her client list grew. And somewhere along the way, so did her quiet contempt for the man beside her. The man who still wore work boots to dinner, who didn't own a single designer suit, who had become, in her privately shifting opinion, no longer enough. She never said it out loud. She just started coming home later, taking calls in the other room. Looking at Zaire the way you look at furniture you've stopped noticing, not with hatred, but with the kind of indifference that is almost worse. And then Jermaine Knox entered the picture. Zaire discovered the affair on an ordinary Tuesday morning, not through confrontation, not through confession, but through a text message on Latrice's phone while he was looking up a restaurant address. He stood in the kitchen of the house his parents had left him, gripped the counter's edge, and went absolutely still. He set the phone down. He poured his coffee, and he went to work. That kind of stillness is not weakness. Any woman who has ever watched a good man hold his pain together with both hands knows exactly what that silence means. On the day the judge signed the divorce papers, Mama Dolores was waiting in the courthouse parking lot on Capitol Street with an umbrella and a face like carved mahogany. She held her son in the rain for a long moment. Then she pulled back and said, "Son, they can take the house and the truck, but they cannot take your mind or your hands. Now go build again, from the foundation up." He didn't know it yet, but those 14 words were about to become the cornerstone of a $280 million company. Stay with us, because what Zaire did next, in the darkest season of his life, is the part of this story that will change the way you think about what it means to start over. The couch in Mama Dolores' living room on Tierwester Street had a spring that caught you right in the middle of the back if you shifted wrong in the night. Zaire knew that spring well by the end of the first week. He'd lie there staring at the water stain on the ceiling, listening to the neighborhood dogs bark at nothing, running calculations in his head until exhaustion finally pulled him under. 42 years old, sleeping on his mother's couch, starting from zero. And somehow, underneath all the grief, something in him felt strangely clear. That clarity has a name. Psychologists call it post-traumatic growth, and it is very real. When a person loses the weight they didn't realize they'd been carrying, a marriage built on slowly accumulating contempt, a version of themselves that had spent years shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. The sudden absence of that pressure can feel, paradoxically, like oxygen returning to a room. The pain doesn't disappear. But for the first time in years, there is enough space to breathe, enough space to build. Zaire got up every morning at 5 o'clock. He made coffee in Mama Dolores' old percolator, the one she'd owned since 1987 that sounded like a small locomotive clearing its throat. And he sat at the kitchen table in the blue dark before sunrise, and he wrote code. He had been developing the framework for something he called Project Foundation for almost 2 years, a predictive AI software platform designed to identify structural weaknesses in buildings and construction sites in real time. He'd worked on it in stolen hours, quietly, because Latresse had never been particularly interested in what he was doing at that kitchen table. She assumed it was a hobby. It was not a hobby. During the day, he pulled double shifts with a construction firm off the I-10 corridor. Every evening he came home, washed off the day, ate what Mama Dolores had left warming on the stove, her slow-cooked black-eyed peas, her fried chicken with the crisp edges that tasted like every Saturday morning from childhood. And then he sat back down beneath that yellow kitchen light and went back to building. Mama Dolores kept him company sometimes, folding laundry or peeling sweet potatoes, telling slow stories about neighbors and old friends. She never brought up Latresse. She just talked, steady and low, like a creek running over familiar stones. And those evenings became the ones where the loneliness felt most survivable. Some nights after she went to bed, he sat alone and let the grief come. Not loudly, not dramatically. He simply sat with it, the way a man sits with a thing he cannot fix, until it moved through him and left him quiet again. Then he set his alarm for 5 o'clock and did it all over. Behavioral researchers call this constructive emotional compartmentalization, the discipline of feeling pain fully in its proper time and place, without letting it contaminate every other area of functioning. It is not suppression. Suppression is dangerous, and it always costs more than it saves. This is something different. A man who grieved at midnight and still showed up at 5. That distinction between running from pain and carrying it without being destroyed by it is the difference between surviving and building. It was through a community home repair initiative in 3rd Ward that Zaire met Serena Caldwell in the fall of 2022. She was 40 years old, the CEO of a private investment firm based in Midtown Houston, arrived at the project site in work boots and a hard hat she clearly knew how to wear. Her grandmother had lived 2 streets over. She understood that investing in a community is not charity, it is infrastructure. He was cautious. He had earned his caution honestly. But Serena was patient in a way that disarmed him slowly. She began stopping by Mama Dolores's house on Thursday evenings, sometimes with food from a place she liked on Old Spanish Trail, sometimes with something she had cooked herself. She asked Zaire about Project Foundation and listened to the entire answer without checking her phone once. He had not had someone listen to the entire answer in a very long time. One October evening, sitting on the porch as the neighborhood settled into the dark, Serena looked at him directly and said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Go ahead. Are you letting me get close because you actually want to, or because having someone close makes it easier to feel like less of the man your ex-wife walked away from?" Therapists call this attachment transparency, naming the hidden fear out loud so that neither person has to carry it silently beneath everything else. Answered honestly, it becomes the foundation of something real. Deflected, it quietly poisons whatever grows there. Zaire didn't answer that night. He sat with it for 6 weeks. Then he answered, not with words, but with his consistent choices. Showing up, building forward, refusing every available opportunity to make Serena a character in a revenge story she hadn't signed up for. He chose her, deliberately, on purpose. Not to fill a space Latrice had left, but because she was worth choosing. Then, in January 2023, a former colleague of Latrice's reached out privately. She had held on to certain documents and recordings for over a year, and her conscience had finally outweighed her caution. Zaire opened the files alone at the kitchen table on a Thursday night. What he found stopped him cold. The affair had begun 18 months before the divorce filing, not 3 months as he had assumed. Recorded conversations between Latrice and Germain detailed a coordinated financial strategy, which accounts to move, which assets to claim, when to file. In one exchange, Latrice's voice was relaxed, almost casual. By the time he figures it out, there won't be anything left to figure out. Zaire turned his phone face down on the table. He pressed both palms flat against the wood and stayed there, breathing. Then quietly, he struck the table once, hard enough to split the skin across 2 knuckles. Mama Dolores appeared in the doorway in her robe. She looked at his hand, then at his face, moved without a word to the cabinet for the first aid kit, and sat across from him. She wrapped his hand carefully and let the silence hold. Finally, she said, "What are you going to do with it?" "Chite, keep building." She nodded once. "Good." He forwarded everything to Malik Caldwell that same night. Malik reviewed the materials the next morning and said, "This is actionable, whenever you're ready." Zaire said he wasn't ready yet. He had something to finish first. What psychologists call long game thinking, the ability to delay a powerful response in favor of a more considered and ultimately more consequential one, is extraordinarily rare. And it almost always produces a more lasting outcome than any immediate reaction could. He chose to build first. Let the work speak first. Let the truth follow in its own time. By 2023, Montgomery Dynamics was incorporated. By early 2024, the company had secured a major infrastructure contract with the city of Houston, one that nearly collapsed when a coordinated rumor campaign, quietly run by Germain through industry back channels, began casting doubt on Zaire's professional history. The contract held, narrowly, because Serena stepped in with a critical early-stage investment. By June 2025, Montgomery Dynamics carried a valuation of $280 million. Zaire still returned to Third Ward on weekends to mentor young men from the neighborhood, not for recognition, but because those were his people. Meanwhile, Latrice's PR firm had collapsed. Germain had been far more interested in what she could provide than in anything lasting. By 2025, she was living at her aunt's house in Sunnyside, mounting bills, shrinking options, a name that no longer opened the doors it once had. She found the Montgomery Dynamics listing on a Thursday in April. The CEO was listed simply as Z. Montgomery. She saw no reason to look deeper than that. She had no idea. When the ground gives out beneath you, don't spend what remains chasing the people who pulled it away. Use every ounce of that energy to build something they never imagined you were capable of. Family, community, and the quiet discipline of showing up. Those are the strongest foundations anyone can stand on when life's storms arrive. Zaire had proof of everything Latrice did, documented, dated, and ready to use. And he chose to wait 3 years before acting on it. Was that wisdom, or did he wait too long? Drop your answer right now. Just 2 words. Pure wisdom, or too long. And if this story reminds you of someone you know, or something you've lived through yourself, tell us. We're reading every single comment. Hold on, because what happened the moment that office door opened and the chair slowly turned around is the part of this story that nobody in that room will ever forget. Thursday morning, June 2025. Houston heat already pressing before 8 o'clock. Inside the Montgomery Dynamics Tower on Louisiana Street, the climate control kept everything cool and still. The lobby was deliberately understated. Polished concrete floors, walls hung with large format photographs of Houston neighborhoods, 3rd Ward, 5th Ward, Sunnyside. On the wall behind the reception desk, a single framed line of text. Build from the foundation up. Latrice Beaumont had been sitting in one of those chairs for 17 minutes. She had arrived early, an old professional habit. Charcoal business suit, dry cleaned twice. Talking points memorized. She had reminded herself that morning in her aunt's bathroom mirror that Latrice Beaumont was still someone to be reckoned with. The CEO was listed only as Zil Montgomery. It had not occurred to her to look further than that. Ms. Beaumont? Mr. Montgomery will see you now. 3rd floor, end of the hall. Double doors, dark wood, no nameplate. The office was corner-facing, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Houston skyline. The desk was clean. A laptop, a coffee mug, a framed photograph she couldn't make out from the doorway. The chair behind the desk was turned away from her, facing the windows. Good morning. I'm Latrice Beaumont. I have a 10 o'clock. The chair turned. Time does something specific in moments like that. It doesn't accelerate. It thickens, goes slow and dense, like the second between lightning and the understanding that it was lightning. Zaire Montgomery looked at her across the desk. He had changed in 3 years. Not softened, but settled. Dark-fitted suit, no tie. Hands folded on the desk with deliberate, unhurried stillness. The only visible difference was in his eyes. They were not wounded. They were not guarded. They were simply, completely clear. He said, in a voice exactly as she remembered it. Deep, measured, calm. Hello, Latrice. She stood without moving for 3 full seconds. Then her portfolio slipped. Her resume, her references, her printed talking points. They scattered across the polished floor between them like a deck of cards dropped mid-shuffle. She did not bend to pick them up. Zaire. Her voice came out entirely wrong. This company is yours? How is that possible? Have a seat, he said. She sat before her composure could negotiate the terms. What was happening in that room was a near-perfect example of what psychologists call a narcissistic collapse trigger, a sudden confrontation with a reality that dismantles the internal story a person has been using to protect themselves from guilt. For 3 years, Latrice had maintained a mental framework in which Zaire was the limitation she had outgrown. That story was armor. It was the version of events that made what she had done survivable to live with. The moment that chair turned, the entire framework collapsed. Not because someone told her she was wrong, because the evidence was sitting directly across from her in a $280 million suit with the Houston skyline at his back. Her first instinct was to reach for arrogance, not out of cruelty, out of survival. "Well, you did well for yourself." A beat. Luck has a way of showing up for some people. Zaire looked at her quietly. Then, "Your resume is strong. 12 years in public relations. I reviewed it before you came in. But at Montgomery Dynamics, the quality we value above everything else is loyalty. The kind that holds when circumstances are difficult. The kind that doesn't dissolve when something more convenient appears. Loyalty, as I recall, was the very thing you told me no longer existed between us." The composure cracked. Not completely, but visibly. "That was years ago, Zaire. I have changed." He leaned forward and slid a folder across the desk. Cream-colored, thick, no label on the cover. "Open it," he said. The first page was a property transfer document dated October 2021. It bore Zaire's signature. Zaire had not signed it. The forensic handwriting analysis attached behind it confirmed the forgery in clinical, unambiguous language. The subject of the transfer: the family home on Cleburne Street, purchased over 30 years by his parents, one payment at a time. She turned the page. A transcript of an audio recording, dated March 2021, 4 months before Zaire had any confirmed knowledge of the affair. Latrice's voice and Germain's, which accounts to access, when to file, how to position the asset claims. Near the end, Latrice's voice carried a note of ease. By the time he figures it out, there won't be anything left to figure out. What Zaire had done is what therapists describe as confronting from earned authority. He did not arrive powered by resentment. He arrived having done the interior work of grief, the practical work of building, and the strategic work of patience. 3 years of it. That combination meant the truth landed not as an attack, but as a verdict. And a verdict delivered from genuine strength carries a weight that no emotional outburst ever fully achieves. Latrice sat with those pages for a long time. Then the last of the arrogance left, completely, quietly, like a tide that had finally reached the waterline. What remained was not the woman who had walked out of a courthouse in red lipstick 3 years ago. Something smaller, more frightened, more honest. She covered her face with both hands. "Zaire, I am so sorry. I was completely wrong. Please, I need this position. I have nothing left. My firm closed. Germain is gone. I have been at my aunt's house for 8 months. Just give me a chance." He let her finish. He had learned patience as a practiced discipline, and he had enough of it now to sit quietly while she said everything she needed to say. When she finally went still, the office was very quiet. Through the windows behind him, Houston carried on, indifferent, enormous, and completely unbothered. The truth does not need to be rushed. Given time and documentation, it finds its own way back to the surface, and when it arrives with everything intact. What happened next, the moment the door behind Latrice opened, is the part of this story that completes everything that came before it. The door opened without a knock. Malik Caldwell entered first, composed, sharp-suited, leather legal portfolio under his arm. He set it on the corner of Zaire's desk without addressing Latrice, and took a position near the window with the calm detachment of a man who has spent 20 years in rooms like this one. Behind Malik came Mama Dolores Montgomery, 68 years old. She carried in her bearing the particular authority that develops in women who have survived enough of life to no longer be intimidated by any room they walk into. Deep plum dress. She moved to the center of the office, stopped, and looked at Latrice Beaumont. Not with anger, not with theater, but with the clear and steady gaze of someone conducting a full assessment. Latrice saw her and went completely still. Mama Dolores spoke first. Her voice was quiet, southern, the kind that does not raise itself because it carries its own weight without assistance. Girl, you took my son's house, the house his father and I spent 30 years paying for. You took the truck he rebuilt with his own hands. You emptied the accounts they had built together. You signed his name on documents he never saw. A pause. And now you are sitting inside the building he raised from the ashes of everything you took, asking for a position. Latrice drew breath to speak. Mama Dolores raised one hand. Gentle, absolute. I am not finished. I was in that parking lot on Capitol Street the day he walked out of that courthouse. I watched my son stand in the rain with $40 and a wet bag. And I want you to know something. Her voice remained even. I did not see him break. Not in front of me, not in front of anyone in this city. Not once. Her eyes moved briefly to Zaire, then returned to Latrice. That is not fortune. That is character under pressure. There is a difference. What Mama Dolores was doing is what researchers call moral witnessing, standing present in a moment of reckoning and naming clearly, with full authority, what occurred, what was done to whom, and at what cost. Studies on trauma recovery consistently show that validation from a trusted community figure carries substantial healing weight for the person who was wronged, often more than legal resolution alone. This moment provided what 3 years of documentation could not. The truth stated plainly in shared space by someone who had watched it all. Malik opened his portfolio and set 2 documents on the corner of the desk. Zaire looked at Latrice. Malik has held this documentation for 2 years. We've been deciding what to do with it and when. She shook her head. Zaire, I know what I did, but Jermaine wasn't who I thought he was either. I was afraid. I had grown up with nothing, and I was terrified of going back to nothing. And I made choices out of that fear that I cannot undo. Her voice fraying now. I am not asking you to pretend none of it happened. I am asking you, as someone who once knew me, to consider that people are more than the worst things they've done. There was a long pause. Zaire looked at her, and his expression did not carry triumph. It did not carry satisfaction. It carried something considerably harder to arrive at than either of those things. It carried understanding. I know where you came from, he said. I was there with you all those years. I know what that fear of having nothing feels like in your chest at night. That fear is real. A pause. But I never thought you were nothing, Latrice. I never once believed that about you. You did. And everything you did to me, I believe now, came from that place more than anywhere else. She covered her mouth with both hands. That was always the real problem between us. Not my salary, not my truck, not my suits. You never believed, deep down, that you deserved something stable and honest. So when it was standing right in front of you, you reached past it for something louder. Something more consistent with the story you'd always told yourself about what your life was allowed to be. Psychologists describe this pattern as scarcity-rooted self-sabotage, particularly common among individuals whose early lives were defined by material instability. When a person has spent their formative years in genuine deprivation, they sometimes internalize not just the fact of poverty, but the belief that stability itself is temporary, that good things will be taken away before they can be fully enjoyed. Out of that belief, they sometimes, unconsciously, without malice, move to dismantle the very things they have worked hardest to obtain. Not because they want destruction, but because at the deepest level, they cannot make themselves believe the good thing is theirs to keep. This is not an excuse. Understanding why something happened and excusing it are two entirely different acts. But wisdom requires holding both simultaneously: the full accountability for the harm caused, and the full humanity of the person who caused it. Zaire had arrived at that understanding. It had taken time, but he had arrived. The second door opened. Serena Caldwell walked in and crossed to where Zaire stood, positioning herself beside him, not as a statement, just as a natural fact of where she belonged. She looked at him first. The way she looked at him was its own complete sentence. Then she said, "For a long time after we first met, I used to ask myself whether he was letting me in because he genuinely wanted to, or because having someone close was easier than sitting with how badly he'd been hurt. That was a fair question. I needed to ask it. But I watched him. Every decision he made building this company. Every moment when the easier choice was to let the anger drive, and he chose something harder instead. The way he treated his mother. The way he went back to Third Ward, not because anyone was watching, but because those were his people. The way he built Montgomery dynamics without ever making it about settling a score." A pause. There is a difference between building to defeat someone and building to become someone. He was always doing the second thing. She rested her hand briefly on his arm, then stepped back. Latrice watched all of this from her chair. The way Serena stood beside him, the quiet, mutual recognition between two people who have built something honest together. The full, unobstructed view of everything she had walked away from. What Serena had described is what psychologists call identity-based motivation, the most durable form of human drive. A person building toward who they intend to be does not run out. The goal is internal and inexhaustible. It does not require anyone else's failure to remain valid. Zaire had made that shift somewhere between the midnight grief and the 5 o'clock alarm. Then Latrice said something no one had anticipated. The city infrastructure contract, the rumors in 2023 that almost killed it. She looked at her hands. That wasn't random industry chatter. Jermaine organized it. He paid someone to work the back channels, and I was aware. I told myself you would survive it. I told myself a lot of things in those years to make the choices I was making feel acceptable. Malik wrote something in the portfolio without looking up. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because," Latrice said, bone-deep tiredness in her voice, the sound of a person setting down something carried far too long. "I am exhausted from being the person who did those things, and I cannot figure out how to stop being her while I am still pretending she doesn't exist." From across the office, Serena spoke quietly. "Then stop pretending." It was not forgiveness. It was not a welcome. It was simply the only real starting point for any genuine change. Mama Dolores looked at Latrice for a long moment. Then, without warmth, but without cruelty, "That's where you begin, child. Right there. True success cannot be measured by what is taken from someone else. It is measured by who you become. Decision by decision, day by day, until the person looking back at you from the mirror is someone you can fully stand behind. What Zaire said when he stood up from that desk, and what he placed in her hands before she left, is something every single person watching this story needs to hear. Zaire stood up from his desk. Not quickly, not dramatically. He rose the way a man rises when a meeting has reached its natural conclusion, with a settled finality that carries more authority than any raised voice could. He walked to the window and looked out over Houston. Third Ward, somewhere behind the glass. The street where his parents had lived. The courthouse parking lot where his mother had held him in the rain. He turned back. Latrice, you have real professional ability. 12 years in public relations doesn't disappear because a firm closes. That knowledge is yours. It was never the problem. But this company is built on a specific kind of trust. Not just competence, the kind that holds in private, that doesn't calculate, that shows the same face in a difficult moment as it does in an easy one. You made different choices 3 years ago. I can't set those aside, and I wouldn't ask you to pretend I should. He opened the top drawer and withdrew an envelope. She took it slowly, with both hands. That envelope contains a bank check covering 6 months of rent. Not charity, a bridge. Time and stability to make a clear-headed decision about what comes next. There is also a name inside. Patricia Gaines. She runs a communications firm out of Midtown. Solid reputation, honest operation, and she has been looking for someone with your background for the better part of a year. I called her this morning. Latrice stared at the envelope. I told her you would reach out. What you do with that is yours to decide. Zaire. She could barely form the sentence. After everything, why would you? Because a person's worth is not measured by what they take. It's measured by what they build, and by what they choose to do when they finally have the power to decide how a story ends. I was raised to build, not to hold ruins over people's heads. Mama Dolores, from her chair near the window, did not speak, but her chin lifted just slightly, with the quiet, absolute pride of a woman who has been right about her child for a very long time. Latrice left the building 20 minutes later, the envelope in her hands. The folder of evidence remained on Zaire's desk, ready for the appropriate next step, but not deployed that morning as a weapon. The story of what happened in that third-floor office moved the way truth tends to move in a connected city. Not through press releases, but through people. Through the dense and long memory network of Houston's Black professional community, where reputations travel faster than resumes. Nobody was instructed to share it. It simply moved, the way accurate information moves when it is finally allowed to walk on its own. 2 weeks later, the rest of the story accelerated. Jermaine Knox had run out of room. The financial arrangements that had seemed manageable in 2021 had compounded badly. He was in a studio apartment in Pearland, not answering most of his calls. He contacted Zaire through an intermediary. Malik handled the negotiation. What Jermaine provided was a video recording, made out of guilt or self-preservation, impossible to say. In it, he described in full detail the coordinated scheme, the planned divorce strategy, the forged property transfer, the deliberate interference with the city infrastructure contract. He named dates, figures, and specific decisions. At one point, he played back a recording Latrice had made, unaware Jermaine was preserving it, in which she spoke about their plans with a confidence that left no ambiguity about intent. Zaire reviewed the recording privately. He held it for 2 days. Then he published it, a direct 3-paragraph post on his personal LinkedIn account. accompanied by the documentary evidence Malik had organized over 2 years. These are the facts. I share them not to harm anyone, but because accountability is the foundation of any community worth building in. Within a week, 2 employment opportunities Latrice had been developing went silent. By the end of July, she had relocated to a cousin's home in Atlanta, a city where her name carried no prior history. Houston did not pursue her. It simply moved on, as cities do. Jermaine faced a separate and more formal reckoning. Civil proceedings related to the forged property transfer and fraudulent business interference, both of which Malik had been building documentation for since 2023. There is a principle worth naming here: the boomerang effect of integrity, the pattern by which consistent honesty accumulates a kind of social and professional trust that functions as a shield during moments of attack and an amplifier during moments of disclosure. Zaire simply told the truth, clearly and publicly, from a position of established credibility. People who had watched him build Montgomery Dynamics from nothing recognized the story as consistent with the man they had observed, and they trusted it accordingly. Live your life in a way that keeps your conscience clear. Not because consequences are guaranteed, but because the person you have to live with every morning and every evening is yourself. And no shortcut is worth the cost of becoming someone you cannot respect. The final chapter is not about what happened to Latrice or Jermaine. It is about a wedding in the woodlands, a young oak tree planted in a front yard, and 2 cups of tea on a back porch as the September evening came in soft. That is the part worth staying for. The wedding was small, intentionally, deliberately, stubbornly small. Saturday afternoon, late September 2025. The backyard of Zaire and Serena's home in the woodlands, a pale stone house on a quiet cul-de-sac surrounded by pine trees, back porch facing a wide open yard, and a sky so blue, it looked like something a person would have to earn. Mama Dolores arrived early, the way she always arrived at anything that mattered. Deep plum dress, a hat with strong opinions of its own. She walked the backyard slowly, straightening a ribbon here, adjusting a chair there. When Serena came out through the back door, ivory dress, simple, entirely right for who she was, Mama Dolores stopped and looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, firmly. "You'll do," she said. Serena laughed. "That may be the kindest thing you've ever said to me." "Don't push it." Malik Caldwell stood at the front in a suit that finally fit correctly, a detail he would later acknowledge had taken an embarrassingly long time to resolve. When Zaire came around the side of the house and walked toward the small gathering of 30-some people, the right number, the actual people, no performance required, he moved with the ease of a man who has arrived somewhere he always knew he was heading. A single guitarist from the community center on Blodgett Street in 3rd Ward played something slow and warm while the late September light came down through the pine trees in long bars of gold. The vows were private. Neither Zaire nor Serena had been willing to make them a performance. What they said to each other, they said quietly, facing each other, with the people who loved them bearing witness to the shape of it without requiring every word. Afterward, there was food. Mama Dolores had been in that kitchen since 7 in the morning, and the evidence was extraordinary. And laughter, and toasts that were funny in the particular way that comes only from people telling stories about things they actually survived together. At some point in the late afternoon, Zaire went to the garage and returned carrying a young oak sapling in a burlap-wrapped root ball. Maybe 4 feet tall. Slender trunk, leaves new and bright. He carried it to the front yard. Malik brought a shovel. Serena stood beside him. Mama Dolores watched from the porch, hands folded. He dug the hole himself, measured, methodical. He set the tree. He packed the soil around the roots with both hands, pressing firmly, the way a man works when he intends something to last. His father had said something to him once when Zaire was about 12, passing a shovel back and forth between them in the side yard on Tierwester Street, that a tree was the most honest thing a man could plant. Takes years to grow. You cannot rush it. You cannot fake it. You plant it, you tend it, you leave it for whoever comes after you. That is what legacy looks like. Zaire stood up, brushed the soil from his palms, and looked at the tree without speaking. That evening, after the guests had gone and the yard gone quiet, Zaire and Mama Dolores sat on the back porch with 2 cups of tea. The September night was soft. Wind chimed somewhere down the street. A neighbor's dog barked once and fell quiet. She said after a while, "You doing all right?" "Yeah, I genuinely am." "Not just telling me what I want to hear?" "No, ma'am," she nodded, sipped her tea. "I want you to know something," he said. "I didn't win because Latrice lost. That's not what this is, and I don't want it to be." He turned the cup in his hands. "I won because I never stopped building, because you didn't let me quit on that couch, because Serena saw something in me worth staying for, and she stayed. Because Malik stood by me when there was nothing in it for him yet. Because the people in Third Ward kept believing even when the numbers weren't there." He looked at his mother. "That's the legacy. That's what Dad was talking about with the tree. Not the house, not the company. This, the people, the foundation." Mama Dolores set down her cup. She reached across and placed her hand over his, rough, warm, completely certain, and held it there. "Your father," she said quietly, "would be so proud of you." The wind chimes sounded again down the street. In the front yard, the young oak tree stood in the dark, slender, upright, and already beginning to take root. This story teaches us that the most powerful thing a person can do after betrayal is not retaliation. It is return. Return to your values. Return to your community. Return to the work that is yours to do. Zaire Montgomery did not succeed because Latrice suffered. He succeeded because he chose. Every morning, in the dark, in the heat, in the exhaustion, to build something real rather than spend his remaining energy tearing down something false. For every good man who has ever been taken for granted, for every person who laid a foundation that someone else stood on while quietly planning their exit, for every son, grandson, brother, or husband carrying something heavy and refusing to let it show, know this: the foundation does not disappear when they leave. It is still there, under your feet, waiting for you to build on it again. And for every grandmother, every mother, every woman watching this who loves a man like that, tell him. Tell him what Mama Dolores said in the rain on Capitol Street. They can take the house. They can take the truck. But they cannot take your mind or your hands. Now go build again, from the foundation up. This story reminds us of 3 things that are easy to forget when life has dealt you a hard hand. First, the people who walk away from you while you are still unfinished are not qualified to write the final verdict on your worth. Zaire did not become less valuable the moment Latrice decided he was. Her opinion was not the truth. It was just the loudest thing in the room at the time. Second, grief and productivity are not opposites. Zaire wept at midnight and coded at 5 in the morning. He did not wait until the pain was gone to begin building. If you are sitting with something heavy right now, you do not need to resolve it before you act. Pick one small, concrete thing you have been putting off. One phone call, one drawer cleaned out, one morning walk, and do it today. Inside the grief, not after it. Third, loyalty given to the wrong person is not wasted, it is transferred. Every ounce of care and faithfulness Zaire poured into that marriage did not disappear when it ended. It became the character that built the company. Nothing honest that you have ever given is truly lost. It lives in who you have become. That is what the oak tree in the front yard means. Not triumph, not revenge. Just a man who kept his hands in the soil long enough for something real to take root.
This story was written by a human, supported by AI. It's not grand, it only hopes to gently touch your heart. That even when looked down upon or pushed aside, justice may arrive late but never absent, and kindness will ultimately be rewarded in the most beautiful way. Production team story and screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.